So you wants to tangle with us Americans, huh? Aye, aye, sir.
They can't do that to the Navy.
During 1941, America instituted its first peacetime draft. The country was not yet at war, but I think it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that they would get into World War II. So this measure was implemented, and the movies tended to reflect that.
We got our dander up. That's all we can take, you know. As we're getting ready to go to war, that may have resonated somewhat as well with the crowds.
That's all I can stand, because I can't stand no more.
It's interesting. Popeye as an American hero seemed pretty well suited for the World War II cartoons. And there's certainly a challenge of trying to adapt what was a character sort of existing in his own world to now actually being in the Navy and actually being a sailor, as was in his name that whole time.
So, you want to be a sailor, huh? Do I wants to be a sailor? I am a sailor. I am Popeye the sailor. I was born a sailor, and there's nothing which I doesn't know about a ship because I am Popeye the sailor. Quiet!
So the Fleischers decided to have Popeye and Bluto join the US Navy, and in November 1941, a month before Pearl Harbor, they drew up a new model sheet showing the two characters in white US Navy uniforms.
They made him much more clean scrubbed and much more patriotic and much more presentable, you know, the kind of sailor you'd be more likely to take home to meet your mother or something like that, as opposed to the sort of scruffy, you know, beaten down kind of tramp sailor that he sort of was in the beginning.
He enlisted in the actual Navy, not the one-man Navy he sort of had in the 30s, where he dressed up in his black midi blouse with the stripes around the collar and his mariner's hat. They changed him to a character that had Navy whites.
So when Popeye finds himself in white uniform in the Navy proper, in the mighty Navy, he's the most experienced sailor on Earth, and what's more, says so, but he has real problems in getting used to the Navy way of doing things, although ultimately, of course, he becomes a hero at the end.
Strangely enough, at the end of that cartoon, they show military insignia. He's being decorated for his shooting down the enemy, and at the end of the cartoon, they hand him his picture in a circle. It's the old Popeye. That's the funny part.
The picture in a circle. What's it for?
The official insignia of the Navy Bomber Squadron.
Now, the white uniform, sometimes varied to blue, I'm sure was not meant to be a permanent measure on the Fleischers' part. I think it's interesting that on the main titles, he appears in his old costume. So I don't think that they plan to make it permanent, otherwise they would have changed that then. And who knew how long the hostilities were going to carry on for. But either way, Popeye remained in that white uniform well into the TV cartoons of the 60s, with a few odd exceptions. And I really don't think it helped the character. Seagar, after all, had made the same mistake in 1929 by drawing Popeye in all-white clothing. He'd lost a lot of his visual impact and balance in that way, and I genuinely regret the switch to a white uniform, at least for the duration. And I do feel sure that if the Fleischers had kept control of their studio, come 1945, Popeye would have gone back to his original clothing.
Man the guns and blow that dirty right out of the sky!
In other parts of the world, the Popeye character was immediately recognizable as being Americana and being American. So he was definitely seen as an icon for America.
So from the time of the mighty Navy, you do start to see a strong propaganda element creeping in. There are more of them in the earlier famous cartoons, but it is evident in some of the Fleischer films, but it wasn't something they pushed as often as, say, the Warner Brothers cartoons of the period did. The greater number of them still were about the Popeye-Bluto rivalry with Olive Oyl, and in fact, too many of them, I think, started to follow that pattern rather than varying it with other stories as the Fleischers had done in earlier years.
Hello, Uncle Popeye. Gee, it's good to have you home. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Did you shoot a lot of Japs?
Some of these cartoons are hard to get through. Some of them feature pretty amazing racial imagery. not any different than any of the other cartoons at the time.
There was a notorious cartoon based on a Spike Jones record called You're a Sap, Mr. Jap, which I don't think Popeye puts on his resume anymore. It's the kind of thing where Popeye was clearly drafted into the U.S. Navy as they headed into World War II, and he was a fighting man. He wasn't just a sailor on leave anymore. So the music and the visuals became much more oriented to the war effort.
When he'd eat the spinach, even if he wasn't fighting an enemy, he was just fighting Bluto, would be Stars and Stripes Forever, some kind of John Philip Sousa thing or something like that. And sometimes his muscles, they'd show a dynamo or something like that, and other times it would be a tank.
V for victory. We'll stop 'em.
Some of the folks that were at the Fleischer Studios signed up for the draft almost immediately, being very interested in trying to help out. In fact, one of Fleischer's main animators was a man named Willard Bowski. He signed up right after Pearl Harbor was bombed. He joined the Army, and Bowski was killed actually during the Battle of the Bulge. Here was a man who was really at the top of his career at the Fleischers at the time, one of the top directors, making some of the most popular cartoons, who decides to join the Army to fight for his country. This seemed to hit a lot of the famous studios animators pretty hard at the time.
Geez, that knocked me for a loop, So you see it on all sides, Those are the things you remember the most. You felt so badly for him,
It was during the war, and at night I would change into my uniform and work as a gray lady at Mitchell Field Hospital, which was the receiving center for the very badly wounded. So that was my nighttime life. And then during the day, it was a good level to have something that's completely off the wall. So it was good to have something joyous during the day. But you would really level yourself off when you'd go back at night and see what was happening in the real world.
Certainly the war was quite sobering for a lot of people. It seemed that the team at the studio was interested in trying to produce films that were fun, 6-minute films, but also said something.
These medals we give to you for bravery and courage, too. Your tactics are different. He's Popeye.